Disaster risk identification, assessment, and risk reduction. This video will be pertaining to this topic. All about risk identification, all about assessment of risk, and probably probable ways of reducing them. So, do you think all hazards are disasters? Probably not. All hazards are not disaster. Then what exactly is disaster? Disaster is nothing but hazard which has potential effect on the mass community on a mass scale wherein everybody is left in a lurch. So all hazards are not disaster, but all disasters are basically hazards which have multiple implication and is on a large scale thing. Remember, the potential or probably the probability of the hazard become a disaster is called the risk. So yes, if we do not constrain the hazard, it might take a bigger form and a very destructive shape. That is what a risk is all about. It. So if we can reduce the hazard, eliminate the hazard, probably disaster won't happen. But disasters are lurking to happen. Disasters are catastrophic in nature. Disasters are not only man-made but probably environmental, has an environmental impact altogether. So disaster risk reduction, probably risk management, and how is all about it. And if you look into it, you see we have three gentlemen actually taking four buckets of whatever the thing is all about it. We are not interested in the ingredient. Now, this is what risk mitigation is all about it. In case if there the maximum people that could have taken is because three individuals have got two hands, six buckets could have been brought. But that would have been very difficult for every one of them to carry two buckets each. So what they have done, they have optimized it. Probably instead of carrying one bucket, they have optimized it into the way that has been shown into the pick. Now, this is what we are talking about risk, about preparedness, about mitigation. So people have to be educated. People need to avoid certain risk. People need to be prepared and prepared for the eventualities that might expose their vulnerabilities and their capacities thereof. So yes, framework of areas, area of focus, make disaster risk reduction a top priority. Ensure that the risk reduction uh, requirement is on a national scale and it has the local impetus with a strong institutional basis. Now that is what we say top priority. It doesn't only focuses on the local environment, it doesn't only focus on the local community, but is a national philosophy. It's there in the nation and everybody should be working towards it. Know the risk, take action, identify, assess, monitor disaster risk, and enhance early warning system as the case might be. We talk about build, understand, and awareness. Use knowledge, innovations, educations to build a culture of safety and resilience at every level. And that is what community participation is all about. It the reducing the underlying risk factors, the vulnerability, the exposures, in case people are not confident, be together, and that is more than enough. So that will elevate a lot of fears among them and instill a sense of confidence, strengthening disaster preparedness for the effective responses at every level by focusing on human being, by acknowledging them that they are individual beings and everybody has a potential. Let us explore the role of ISDR, UNDP, OCHA, and CADRI. Yes, what is ISDR? It is International Standard for Disaster Reduction. Now, it's basically a coordination body for implementing an overall disaster risk reduction policy in accordance with the Hyogo Framework for Action, HFA, if I may say so. This was actually determined in Hyogo, the city of Hyogo, where we said that if a disaster happens, environmental disasters happens in one of the country, every person, every country should job in, put in help, extend cooperation, so that the humanity can be saved, so that the society can be revived. Now that is what International Strategy for Disaster Reduction is all about. It a core function is advocacy for disaster risk reduction, International Clearinghouse for Information and Disaster Reduction Strategy. What is United Nations Development Program is all about? The most prominent of all is supports the implementation of disaster risk reduction policy at every country level. Core function is to build national capacity for disaster risk management, providing technical expertise to support capacity building. This is what United Nations Development Program is all about. It. OCHA is another arm of United Nations only. United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is OCHA. Again, I repeat, United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Now, this is nothing but probably integrating it with the development program, integrating and making it coming into a mainstream process, benchmarking what we are looking into it. So preparedness to respond, preparedness to the international humanitarian community respond, preparedness for the national and regional authorities to respond in a collaboration with UNDP, ISDR, and IFRC. Let us talk about CADRI, CADRIA. It is again an international coalition for disaster resilience infrastructure. CADRI stands for Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure. Essentially a mix of everything of ISDR, UNDP, OCHA. It's basically trying to build post-disaster impact altogether. They aim to build capacity, they aim to build livelihood, they aim to develop a disaster mitigation strategy, henceforth that similar disasters should not strike. So disaster risk reduction cycle, if we look into it, we have a disaster that comes around. This is where the disaster happened, and this is what is going to go around it. Disasters has happened out here. We have a response, then probably a recovery, the prevention, preparedness, and the APR planning. Those goes on because why have I put it into a circle mode? Because disasters are waiting to happen. This is what I wanted to stress upon it. Probably in this position we will be better prepared to mitigate, we will be better prepared to react, probably we will be better prepared to save more lives and properties thereby. So risk is nothing but hazard multiplied or times vulnerability, the exposures divided by the capacity thereby. If we can increase this capacity, remember this can be, hazard can be 10 times and vulnerability can be again 10 times. Now what can we do around it? We have to work something where we can build a capacity altogether. So 10 into 10 would be 100, right? So how do I do it? Can we build a capacity from 1 to 10? Because then it becomes 10 times. And if it becomes 100, probably we are making life normal. So we are taking care of the risk. In normal languages, identify the nature of physical hazard, such as impact probability, location, and intensity. Determine the human vulnerability to the risk by identify the exposures and weaknesses thereby. That is what we should be working around it. Identify the capacities and available resources for managing and reducing vulnerability. Determine acceptable levels of risk as the case might be, as what can be done, what we need to do in case disaster strike, what are the standard operating procedures. So we need to identify our resources, we need to identify our capacities, we need to identify the risk in which we can mitigate them. So global statistics is natural disasters, most of the time it's the downtrodden people, people who are in the poverty lane, who are absolutely poor, people who are women, the female genders, the children who gets impacted the maximum time. Men normally form the majority of the victims in armed conflict, or should I say man-made disasters, since they are combatant and have more risk of losing their life thereby. The risk, the vulnerabilities that people face from natural disaster are as much a product of social situation as that of physical environment. Absolutely, yes. It's the way you carry your life, the way the roles have been defined. Social network, power relations, knowledge and skills, gender roles, health, wealth, and location all affect risk and vulnerability. to disaster and the capacity to respond to them. Vulnerabilities and capacities of individuals and social groups evolve over time and determine people's ability to cope with disaster and recover from it, as the case might be. And we need to go around it time and again. This understanding needs to be applied to the following three areas. What are they? First, the possible impact of disasters, analyzing the possible impact. What are they? Is it a death to the life? Is it that destruction to the property? Is it a destruction to livelihood? Is it the flora that has been affected? Is it the fauna that has been impacted? Analyze the local capacities to reduce such propensities, and probably appropriate responses can be developed. Please design those appropriate responses, design those programs, understand what can be done thereby and how it needs to be done. So, what are the consequences? Question is, what are the consequences if disaster response requirement is there? What we look into it? DRR, disaster response requirement. First, identify the risk identification, understand the risk assessment. Inappropriate policies and programs should be negated, in fact, not implemented. We should be looking to optimize our responses, prioritize financing our risk at not only national level but at the community level, at the local level. Ineffective disaster risk reduction interventions and outcomes is what we look into forward to. Interventions can create or worsen gender inequalities, vulnerabilities. Now that is what we should be taken. If consideration is not taken, it becomes inadequate risk identification, inappropriate policies, ineffective mitigation technique, and probably interventions can worsen the gender divide, the society divide thereby. So risk assessment process is identify the nature of the physical hazards, such as location, such as the intensity and the probability. Let's say, for example, when houses have been built too close to a river or a water body or a mountain, it is often poor and vulnerable person who cannot afford a safe living place, because a rich people would always build his or her house at the top of a plateau where it is considerable high of the sea level and definitely just beyond the purview of the mountains, where which are seismologically very sensitive zone per se. So identify the resources. The society's roles has to be done. We need to make people show compassion towards one another. Reproductive role of women often make them homebound, which make them particularly vulnerable in earthquakes, hurricanes. Cultural norms can prevent women and girls from learning skills such as swimming, such as climbing, while societal and religious dress code might be practical in times of disaster altogether. So identify the roles of the society. What are the impediments that are coming into it? Is it your lifestyle that we are looking into it? Is it a culture that might impede certain development? Economic aspect, poverty may affect the level of education awareness, leading to the less access to information about potential risk. Poverty can lead to lack of safe areas for planting crop. Accessing market, poverty can also be a bad, very bad pre-disaster health condition. Remember, poverty reduces choices thereby. So what should we do around it? Let us identify the exposure. Let us identify the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities. So loss of housing during disaster means families are forced to relocate. Families are forced to stay in a community center, so or probably move with their extended families, where in all probabilities the women, the children are not at all safe. In the aftermath of disaster, women and children are becoming victims of trafficking, domestic sexual violences. Male female migration during disaster can lead to increase in unsafe sexual practices for both the gender, which might lead to the risk of women be forced into unsafe transactional space, as the case might be. So, what capacities are required? Let us try to address this situation and find out what are the capacities that we require. First and foremost is to map the hazard. what are the mapping process that can be taken into consideration, identify every zone, identify what are the hazards that have been associated, hazards that are potentially lurking to become a disaster, mobilize communities to prepare for them, to respond to this requirement, assess the damages and impact. And in fact, I might stress, after every disaster, take a learning lesson, take a learning lesson and understand what needs to be done in case similar disaster happens once next time. Identify the missing community members, and probably the agents of change might becomes much more active and instill new community behavior, new community participation for mitigating disaster. With this, I come to an end of this presentation. Thank you for watching this video till the very end.